She held the folder up toward the ceiling light without thinking much of it, just a quick habit before filing it away. But as the globe passed through the thin paper, something strange showed through the ink, numbers that did not belong there, numbers that had been quietly altered. This was not an ordinary report. It held some of the most sensitive figures in the entire building. For a moment, she considered saying nothing and simply moving on with her day. Then she glanced up at the blackboard across the room and froze. The equation chalked up there did not add up. She checked it again, then again, and each time her doubt turned into certainty. Without asking permission, she grabbed a piece of chalk, climbed a small step ladder, and began working out the rocket's flight path by hand in front of everyone. Within minutes, a small crowd of engineers had gathered behind her, stunned that a problem which had stumped the whole team for nearly 2 weeks was being solved on the spot by a woman none of them had really noticed before. What normally took a full team the better part of a week, she finished in a single afternoon. When a supervisor walked in and demanded to know who had produced these numbers, the white team lead standing nearby had no good answer, and his silence said everything. "Who did this?" the supervisor asked. "Katherine. Katherine Goebel, sir," came the reply.
At that very moment, the woman in question was nowhere near her desk.
She was jogging across the campus grounds, heading toward a restroom nearly 2 miles away, because there was no other option available to her. She worked inside one of the most advanced research institutions in the country, surrounded by brilliant minds and cutting-edge machinery, yet the color of her skin still shaped every hour of her day. On her very first morning there, she reached for the shared coffee pot just like anyone else would, and was mistaken for cleaning staff. By the following day, a second, smaller pot had appeared on the counter, unofficially but unmistakably marked as hers alone to use. The building was full of restrooms, but none of them were meant for her. The nearest one she was permitted to use sat roughly 2 miles from her desk. Reports handed to her were sometimes blacked out entirely, with colleagues insisting the missing sections were classified, even though she was often the only person in the room actually barred from seeing them. Because of this, she lost hours every single day just trying to work around obstacles no one else faced. The pressure built steadily, day after day, until she was close to breaking under the weight of it. And still, she kept showing up, kept solving what others couldn't, kept proving her ability until admiration replaced suspicion. In the process, she helped rewrite the trajectory of an entire nation's space program. Even as a small child, numbers spoke to her in a way they didn't speak to anyone else. Recognizing this, her parents made sure she reached the best available school for black students in the state, and by age 9, she was already sitting among teenagers years older than her, working through material that left them struggling while she moved through it with ease. Her instructors quickly understood they were looking at someone extraordinary. But talent alone didn't smooth the road ahead. A marriage that fell apart left her raising 3 daughters by herself. Still, her gift with mathematics eventually opened a door at a government research facility, though the office she was assigned to was a cramped, damp room in the basement, shared with a group of other black women doing the same overlooked work. Then, in 1961, everything shifted. Word came that the Soviets had successfully put their own rocket into space, and the news sent a wave of anxiety through Washington. The idea of a rival nation's spacecraft passing overhead day after day was more than officials could stomach, and pressure came down hard to build an American rocket, and fast. To speed things along, the agency brought in a set of new IBM calculating machines. But before those machines could even be installed, someone capable of advanced analytic geometry was needed, and it turned out nobody in the main building, filled entirely with white staff, could actually do it. So they turned, almost reluctantly, to the basement group of black computers. "The Space Task Group needs a computer right away, someone who actually understands analytic geometry," Do you have anyone? Yes. Katherine can handle that. As the man who delivered the assignment walked off, one of Katherine's colleagues, Dorothy, hurried after him to ask, again, whether her request to be formally recognized as supervisor had gone through. She had been running the group unofficially for over a year since the last supervisor left, but the answer, again, was no. There was no appetite for putting a black woman in a supervisory title. Meanwhile, Katherine found herself reassigned, at least temporarily, to the agency's main division. She was informed, almost as an afterthought, that she'd need to wear skirts below the knee, that only the plainest pearl necklace would be acceptable, and that her main job would simply be writing up reports. Your clearance. They've never had a colored girl in here before. Katherine, don't embarrass me. Those words sat heavily on her as she stepped through the door with her stomach in knots. Almost immediately, a coworker mistook her for custodial staff. She went looking for the secretarial office to sort things out, but once they realized she was black, the warmth in the room evaporated and condescension took its place. Still, the division head who reviewed her file wasn't willing to dismiss her. On top of her usual duties, he asked her to check everyone else's math each day, a decision that irritated one particular colleague named Paul enough that he began deliberately smudging out sections of his own calculations before dropping them on her desk. My numbers are correct. I'll check them anyway, sir. No trouble at all. I won't even be here. Work with what's visible. Everything else is classified. You don't have the clearance. It was around this point that Katherine urgently needed a restroom, and when she asked the secretary where to find one, she was met with a blank stare. Nobody seemed to know where the facilities for black employees even were. With no time to spare, she snatched up her files and bolted, sprinting through hallway after hallway without finding anything she was allowed to use. Eventually, she had no choice but to leave the building entirely and run toward the West Campus, a trip that ate up nearly half an hour each way. Even inside the restroom, she didn't dare linger, aware that every minute away would be noticed. And it was. Where's the girl with the numbers? On a break, sir? By the time she made it back, an hour had vanished and a fresh stack of assignments was waiting on top of the ones she hadn't finished. She worked straight through until nightfall to catch up, only to watch her supervisor glance at her completed files and toss them directly into the wastebasket, not out of cruelty exactly, but because the figures were already outdated by the time she'd finished them. He wasn't interested in apologies. What he wanted was people who could see past the raw numbers and anticipate problems before they surfaced, people who thought ahead of the data instead of simply reacting to it. His ambitions, after all, stretched all the way to the moon, even while his team was still struggling just to keep their feet on solid ground. That evening, drained, she leaned against the wall outside and let herself feel, for a moment, something close to relief. On the walk home, Dorothy unloaded her frustrations. 10 years of never missing a day, of quietly running a whole department without ever receiving the title or the pay that came with it. Katherine, in turn, admitted she had no idea how long her current placement would even last, whether it would be days or barely a week before she was sent back to where she started. Home offered little rest either. Raising 3 children alone left barely any room to breathe. At a neighborhood gathering, friends tried to set her up with a charming, well-built Army officer named Jim, a man rumored to have once been a talented pianist. Learning that she worked at the space agency, Jim's first reaction leaned on old assumptions, that such demanding work would only wear a woman down. His surprise that women were even allowed to do this kind of work struck Katherine as dismissive, and she didn't let it slide. If you don't stop talking right now, I mean no disrespect. I'll have you know I was the first Negro woman to attend graduate school at West Virginia University. There are 4 Negro women working at NASA, and we are proud of every bit of work we do for this country. So yes, they let women handle this kind of work, Mr. Johnson, and it isn't because we wear skirts. It's because we wear glasses. Good day." The workload only intensified, and coffee became her one small comfort. But the instant she reached for the shared pot, discomfort rippled across the room. No one wanted to share something she had touched. Sensing the tension, she quietly returned to her seat, saying nothing, though the silence around her spoke plainly enough. Sure enough, a separate, smaller pot appeared the next morning, unofficially reserved for her. She was, after all, the only black employee in that particular office, and this sort of treatment had become almost routine to her by then. She reached for it anyway, only to discover it hadn't even been filled with the same coffee meant for everyone else. Meanwhile, the altered files kept coming, deliberately smudged, deliberately incomplete, making her job harder than it needed to be. Rather than complain, she found her own workaround, holding the pages up so the light passed through and revealed what had been hidden. Once she'd pieced together the missing numbers, she climbed the ladder and solved it herself, leaving her white colleague speechless. When the department head found out, his first instinct wasn't praise, it was suspicion. He wondered aloud whether she might be some kind of informant, since more than half the data had been deliberately obscured, and he assumed no one could reconstruct it without inside help. Cornered, Katherine admitted the truth, that she had simply held the paper up to the light. Once he understood what had really happened, he didn't brush it aside. He thanked her directly and ordered the smudging to stop, a decision Paul grumbled about, suggesting they simply switch to darker ink instead. Thankfully, his supervisor wasn't nearly that stubborn. Later, at a birthday celebration, Jim reappeared, and with music playing he asked her to dance, admitting that time away had left him rusty in more ways than one, and that this was why he'd spoken so carelessly before. He asked for another chance. "You still haven't apologized." "I'm sorry, Katherine." "For what, exactly?" "For underestimating you. And every woman like you." Right as the two were mid-dance, a news bulletin cut through the music. The Soviets had just put a man into orbit and brought him home safely. It was a gut punch for the Americans, undeniable proof that they were losing this particular race. Under mounting pressure, the department head called an emergency late-night meeting and insisted, somewhat defensively, that the only reason they'd fallen behind was that the other side had simply outworked them, not that Soviet engineering was superior. From that point forward, overtime became mandatory until the gap closed. Not long after, word spread that the new IBM supercomputer was nearing full operation, and Dorothy realized immediately what that meant. Once it came online, her entire team of human computers would likely be phased out. She began spending her evenings at the library digging through programming manuals, but when the books she needed weren't available in the section designated for black patrons, she slipped quietly into the section reserved for white readers. It didn't take long before she was asked to leave. Left with no legal way to access what she needed, she began smuggling books out instead, teaching herself first and then passing on everything she learned to the rest of her team each evening. There wasn't really a choice. Either they mastered this new machine or they'd all be out of work. In her spare hours, she began sneaking into the computer room to test what she'd read, and eventually figured out why the machine kept producing errors. It had never been properly calibrated. Once she fixed it, the results came out clean. She was caught in the act, technically breaking the rules by being there at all, but when the staff saw what the corrected machine could now do, their skepticism toward her melted, and for the first time, they actually asked for her name. That same day, Katherine went missing again, and this time she was caught in a downpour on her long walk to the West Campus restroom. Inside, she reached for paper towels that simply weren't stocked there. The soap dispenser on the wall was empty too, purely decorative. Drenched and exhausted in a way she hadn't felt before, she trudged back to the office looking like she'd been pulled out of a river. Her supervisor had reached his limit and demanded an explanation for what he assumed was slacking, insisting that something as simple as a bathroom break shouldn't eat up an entire hour. "There is no bathroom for me. Not in this building, not in any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to wear my skirt below the knee, my heels, and a plain string of pearls, except I don't own any pearls, because Lord knows you don't pay colored girls enough to afford them. And I work like a dog day and night, living off coffee from a pot none of you even want to touch. So forgive me if I need the restroom more than once a day." Her outburst landed like a slap, and the shame on her supervisor's face was immediate. He walked straight to the coffee station and ripped the offending label off in front of the whole room. The very next day, he personally removed the sign marking the West Campus restroom as restricted, announcing to everyone that from that point forward there would be no more separation by race inside the agency. Around the same time, after learning she'd fallen ill from getting caught in the storm, Jim began visiting daily with homemade soup, and his patience and warmth slowly won over her 3 daughters. Before long they were holding hands around the dinner table, saying grace together like any ordinary family, and Katherine finally let herself accept him fully into her life. After years of preparation, launch day finally came. The two of them sat glued to the television as the countdown reached 0 and the rocket tore into the sky, everyone holding their breath until it settled safely into orbit. It was a moment of national pride, one that even earned recognition from the president himself. But there was no time to rest on it, because 2 more astronauts were already scheduled to follow, and every calculation needed to be locked down well in advance. Katherine approached her supervisor and asked to get a head start on the trajectory for the Atlas rocket, an entirely different vehicle from the one before it, meaning nothing could simply be reused. He understood immediately that this wasn't ordinary arithmetic. It was closer to building something from nothing, and he wasn't entirely sure she could pull it off, given how razor-thin the margin for error was, comparable to hitting a target the size of a pinhead from hundreds of meters away. Still, impressed by her precision and her confidence, he let her try, on the condition that every figure passed through him first. Paul wasn't happy about the arrangement either, arguing that calculators weren't even authorized to sign off on official reports, and used the technicality to send her work back for revision. Then disaster struck the second flight. The capsule drifted off course during descent and nearly vanished into the ocean. The astronaut survived thanks to a fast rescue, but the capsule itself was lost, and the fallout landed squarely on her supervisor, who now faced pointed questions about how future astronauts were supposed to trust the numbers at all. Paul, trying to be useful, laid out the physics involved, how the capsule's velocity fought against gravity to maintain orbit, and how it needed to shed speed at precisely the right instant to shift from an elliptical path into a controlled descent curve. Too early, and it would burn up on re-entry. Too late, and it would slip free of Earth's pull entirely. Every variable, mass, velocity, timing, distance, friction, had to line up exactly, or the whole calculation collapsed. Feeling the walls closing in, Katherine requested permission to sit in on the mission briefings directly, arguing that constantly recalculating after the fact, every time a number shifted, was setting her up to fail. "You asked for this job, so work with what you've got, or we'll find somebody else who can." There was nothing left to say, so she pressed forward with the number she had. But moments after submitting her final report, she learned the flight time had shifted again, just 6 minutes different this time, the 4th change that day alone. Every shift meant starting the entire calculation over from scratch. Frustrated, she pointed out that if she'd simply been allowed into the briefing room, she'd have the latest numbers already. Paul snapped that it was out of the question. She was a woman, and worse in his eyes, a black woman. The words cut deep, but they also pushed her to work even harder. Her supervisor, watching all of this unfold, said nothing at first. After turning it over in his mind, he finally added her name to the list of people authorized to attend the briefing, and predictably, the numbers shifted yet again, sparking another argument between her and Paul, this time right in front of him. I genuinely believe I'm the right person to present these numbers. Let it go! Are you the one making the call here? No, I am not. And on top of that, she's a woman. There's no established protocol for that. All right, I hear you, Paul. But inside these walls, who exactly sets the rules? You do, sir. You're the one in charge here. Just start acting like it. Quiet, please. Thank you. Walking into the briefing room for the first time, Katherine felt every pair of eyes lock onto her, and for a moment the weight of it nearly got to her. The central issue on the table was the landing zone. The military wanted the recovery area narrowed to a tight 50 square kilometer radius to guarantee a clean pickup. When her supervisor asked, almost on the spot, for the capsule's orbital velocity, Paul froze, unable to answer fast enough. Before the silence stretched too long, Katherine spoke up, stating with total confidence that the figure was roughly 28,234 kilometers per hour. When the military representatives pressed further, asking whether the critical descent point could even be pinned down, Paul offered only that it was theoretically possible, an answer that clearly didn't satisfy anyone in the room. Cornered, her supervisor made a call, handing her a piece of chalk and asking her to show them directly. She approached the board without hesitation, working through the equations methodically, and roughly 2 hours later, had the full answer laid out for the room to see. It won over every skeptic present. That puts your recovery zone at roughly 5 degrees north, 77 degrees west, right about here, give or take 20 square miles. I like her numbers. Of course, all of this hinged on the capsule successfully hitting its re-entry window in the first place, something still under review. With the launch date closing in fast, her supervisor headed to the computer lab, since the sheer volume of remaining calculations now required the new machine. He learned the system had just been recalibrated, but almost nobody actually knew how to operate it, and they'd need a team of trained programmers to feed in the punch cards. Dorothy received orders transferring her to the computer division, but she refused to leave her team behind. Human Resources informed her the transfer applied to her alone, and that once the mission succeeded, the rest of the group would likely be dissolved entirely. That wasn't acceptable to her, and she said so plainly she wouldn't take the position unless her whole team came with her, pointing out that operating a machine of that scale required far more than one person, and her team had already proven themselves more than capable. Eventually leadership relented, and she led her group out of that cramped basement and into a bright, modern office space. The move was technically temporary, but everyone quietly hoped and believed it would become permanent. Meanwhile, Katherine ran into a wall of her own. There was no existing formula for the specific maneuver needed to shift the capsule from its elliptical orbit into a landing trajectory. Launch sequences and landing zones could be worked out, sure, but without solving this particular transition, the capsule would simply stay locked in orbit indefinitely. Maybe this doesn't need new mathematics at all. Maybe it's old math. Euler's method. Euler's method? Exactly. It's ancient, but it still holds up. It works numerically. She rushed back to her original office, dug up a long-forgotten textbook, and worked the old formulas into her current data, confirming the numbers she'd already suspected were correct. That evening happened to be her birthday, so she headed home earlier than usual, only to find Jim waiting, visibly nervous. He dropped to one knee in front of her daughters, holding out a ring that had belonged to his family for generations. Overcome, she didn't even wait for him to finish his sentence before saying yes. After 5 successful unmanned test runs, officials confirmed the new computer system could now fully handle the workload on its own. Her supervisor pulled her aside to explain that IBM's machines now operated at a speed no human could match, and with launch control taking over the calculations directly, there simply wasn't a role left for manual computation on site anymore. Progress, it turned out, came at a cost, advancing the mission while quietly displacing the people who'd carried it this far. Katherine was reassigned back to her original department, and her supervisor, though he felt he'd let her down, had no real power to stop it. As a parting gesture, Human Resources delivered a gift on his behalf, an elegant pearl necklace, quietly mentioning that his wife had spent considerable time picking it out herself. 3 years and 2 months after the project began, launch day finally arrived. Just hours before liftoff, her supervisor discovered a troubling inconsistency. The landing coordinates calculated that morning didn't match the ones from the day before, and worse, nobody could say for certain which set was correct. He relayed the problem to the astronaut, who voiced his own hesitation bluntly. "I'll be straight with you, Al. When I'm flying, I trust my own instincts. But right now it feels like this machine is the one flying me. We're on the same page, John. Our team's already working the problem. Have the girl check the numbers." "The girl?" "Yes, sir." "You mean Katherine?" "Yes, sir, the sharp one. If she confirms them, I'm ready to fly." Realizing exactly how serious the situation had become, her supervisor sent people rushing across the campus to find her, files in hand. It was a route she'd covered on foot more times than she could count, always in heels, but this particular sprint left her soaked through with sweat. The moment the data reached her, she got straight to work, fully aware that lives depended on getting it right. Outside, the launch site had filled with spectators. The astronaut sat ready in his capsule, and everything now hinged on her answer. Just as tension reached its peak, she finished, and rushed the results straight to mission control, only to be met once more with the same cold dismissiveness from certain colleagues. In that instant, she understood something painfully clear. No matter how skilled she was, some attitudes simply weren't going to change. As she turned to walk away, disheartened, her supervisor burst through the door, flashed his badge to get past security, and waved her back inside. With her standing right there, he read the corrected coordinates aloud to the astronaut himself. 84 degrees latitude, 165.2356. The numbers match now. That's very good news. She actually worked out a few more decimal places than that machine managed. I'll take every last digit she's got. Make sure she knows I said thanks. All right, gentlemen, let's send this rocket up. As the countdown hit 0 and the rocket climbed away from the launch pad, the crowd exhaled in relief once it reached stable orbit, but Katherine didn't move an inch until nearly 10 hours later, when the capsule finally splashed down exactly where her numbers said it would, and only then did the tension finally leave her shoulders. While everyone around her erupted in celebration, she tried to slip away quietly, only to be called back once more by her supervisor. Her ability had earned her something rare, a permanent place on the launch team, an exception to how things were normally done, and from there her career only continued to grow. Not long after, she and Jim were married. Around the same time, Dorothy received a new title of her own, not as a programmer this time, but as the first black department head in the organization's history. Their friend Mary pursued her own ambitions just as fiercely, fighting her way into a whites-only institution to complete her studies, and ultimately becoming the country's first black female aerospace engineer. Katherine had, by then, earned the respect of nearly everyone around her. Even Paul, who had once dismissed her outright, personally poured her a cup of coffee as a quiet gesture of respect. In the years that followed, she stayed on, contributing her calculations to the Apollo 11 mission and later to the Space Shuttle program. In recognition of everything she'd given to the field, the space agency named one of its research facilities after her in 2016. And at the age of 97, she received the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.